Okay, as a part of our 50th anniversary of the city of Fridley, we're going to attempt to show you some areas of Fridley as it is today, and Fridley how it was possibly 50 years ago. I'm standing right now on the probably the highest point in Fridley on Matterhorn Avenue overlooking Highway 694. If you could envision this same area back in 1949, what you're seeing behind me was the old Highway 100. At the time that Highway 100 was built, it was the highway of the future. People recommended that there would probably be no highways ever to be built again. And the idea of Highway 100, what was called the Beltline, would circle the entire Twin Cities. And behind me, if you can look down the road towards Brooklyn Center into the Mississippi River, Highway 100 came across from Brooklyn Center and Robbinsdale, across the Mississippi, the railroad tracks. You used to have to stop for the railroad tracks. You came down to University Avenue, which was then just a little thoroughfare through Fridley. It had a stop sign on Central Avenue, and then as you looked toward the east, towards New Brighton, there was quite a drop-off as the land moved down. The reason why we're up here on this particular location gives me a chance to tell you a little bit about the geographical and geological history of Fridley. The reason that this land is so high goes back to the glaciers. So it gives us a chance to go back into history. There were 5 glaciers that affected Minnesota. The last one came down to Minnesota, extended down to a height of land between Minnesota and North Dakota. And how this affects Fridley is when that glacier began to melt, it formed a lake called Glacial Lake Agassiz. The glacier itself pushed up a height of land, and the drainage from that glacier was Glacial River Warren that ran down what is now the Minnesota River Valley. The height of land that pushed the water to the north was the Red River. But how it affected Fridley was this huge glacial river pushed ahead of it all of the loose soil. It hit what is now the Mississippi River, deposited all that sand into what is called now the Great Anoka Sand Plain, which Fridley is a part of. Where we're standing now was the bank of that glacial river, and behind us you can see the extent of it, which was probably 10 or 15 miles across, to the height of land over in the Robbinsdale area. And because of the soil that we had, all that sand, Fridley was never much of a farming community. So that was a part of why we're up here now. Well, another one of the major geographical features of Fridley is the Mississippi River, which forms the boundary of Fridley from this point, which is 37th Avenue, all the way up to Lafayette, and we'll be traveling up that way shortly. But this is a natural boundary, one of the major rivers of the United States, which starts in Minnesota and goes right along the eastern boundary of Fridley. And over to my left is one of the major industries of this area, which is the Minneapolis Water Works, which is actually located right off the Camden Bridge in the city of Fridley. We're standing overlooking the Northtown Switchyards. This switchyard is the largest switchyards west of Chicago. It has a unique way of setting up trains. It has what they call a hump yard, where they push the railroad cars up and then they go down by gravity, and that is how they make up the trains that travel west, most of them west from Fridley. South of the Northtown Switchyards, on the banks, was also at one time a major industry in Fridley, which was the Minnesota silica sand industry. It doesn't show up now because it's all covered by vegetation, but this was the white silica sand that was used by a lot of industries in the production of glass. And for certainly a lot of families in North Minneapolis used to come over and get sand there for their kids' sandboxes. That industry is no longer in operation, as you can see. Over to my left, you'll see also one of the very, very largest industries in Fridley, which is the Northern Ordnance, now called United Systems. During the Second World War, this industry made almost all of the hydraulic pumps for the naval ships. It operated on 3 8-hour shifts, 24 hours a day. The rumors were that there were anti-aircraft facilities along the river across, because this was if this area had been bombed, would have been a major strategic area because of the pumps that were made for the naval ships. If we had to pick an area that is central of Fridley, we're standing in that area right now. Behind us is the Holly Shopping Center that goes back probably to one of the early origins of the city. Back in the 50s, they built Holly Shopping Center. But it's changed a great deal over the years. Some of the older residents will recognize the old country buffet, but think back in your own memories when that was the Piggly Wiggly Market. I wonder how many people can remember that. It then became Penny's Market. It was Penny's for a long, long time. Snyder's Drugstore has been here as an anchor of the center for longer than I can remember. We had Lieb's Woman's Store, Fox's Men's Store. An anchor of the Holly Center for many years was the Nelson Decorating, which is still here. And so this is probably one of the landmarks of Fridley that hasn't changed a lot over the last 40 or 50 years. We've improved the housing of Fridley over the many, many years. On the southeast corner of the Mississippi University intersection is now what's called Christensen Crossing, which is a multiple housing, but over the years that has also changed a great deal. On the corner directly behind me, some of you may remember the Standard Station that was there. There was a National Tea food store, and probably directly behind me was the original Dairy Queen. University Avenue, which is Highway 47, is another major thoroughfare that goes through Fridley, running from north to south. It was a 2-lane road up until the early 1960s, and as the whole metropolitan area and as the suburbs began to grow, University Avenue was ultimately made into a 4-lane thoroughfare. The intersection of University and Mississippi Street, referred to often as the downtown area of Fridley, on the corner where the Target operating facility is now located, there was, as many of you will remember, a Thyson's grocery store, which then became Art Superette, then Stav Superette, a small strip mall which contained the Fridley Drugstore, Fridley Hardware, and Pat and Sadie's Bakery. On the northeast corner was the Red Owl Food Store. And Holly Center has been located in the northwest corners since the late 1950s. The entire area has changed dramatically. Only Holly Shopping Center remains. On the southwest corner of the intersection, there's a new development called Christensen Crossing, which are owner-occupied townhomes and manor homes. The corner where the Fridley Drugstore and Hardware Store were located are now the Target Operations Center. And the old Red Owl store was recently raised and a new Walgreens store was built. It's a wonderful addition to the city of Fridley, to its economic development, and showing the growth of the city. Columbia Arena is one of the very, very nice facilities located in Fridley. Columbia Arena started off as a county facility, one sheet of ice, back in the 1970s. It was later expanded to 2 ice sheets, used by most of the area high schools, and was probably most famous for being used by the movie The Mighty Ducks series. And the producers of that renovated the arena quite extensively. Just recently, the county sold the arena to the Minnesota Amateur Sports Association, but it still operates in the same capacity, is now home to the St. Paul Vulcans of the Central Hockey League. One of the wonderful, wonderful areas of Fridley is Loch Park. Loch Park was established by Cassius and Mrs. Loch a number of years ago, and a covenant with the city that would remain a natural area. It's an area that goes from Central Avenue to University Avenue, Rice Quick runs through the park, and the rest of it has remained natural. It's got bikeways and walkways, and is a very, very popular area for all of Fridley residents just to see the natural setting of the original Fridley. Directly across from Columbia Arena on University Avenue is really one of the jewels of Fridley. Back in the 1970s, Chuck Boudreau, who was the Parks and Rec director, had a vision of a softball soccer complex on an 80-acre piece of land that was originally owned by Sears Roebuck. Sears had intentions of selling it for a major shopping area similar to what we have at Northtown at this time. That didn't work out, and eventually the land was split into two 40-acre sites. The 40 acres to the north was built for industrial use, and the 40 acres to the south was built with 6 ball fields, a nice drainage pond, a small lake here on the property. And what is amazing to almost everyone, this land was developed at absolutely no cost to the Fridley taxpayers. It just happened to be that the state of Minnesota was doing a lot of road work. They needed sand. I had mentioned earlier that Fridley is a part of the Anoka sand plain, so there was sand on this site as deep as 30 feet. So with some innovative financing and so on, the state and the county and some grants and some of our local businesses and service centers contributed to this site. There's 6 ball fields, the lights, and all built at that time in 1983 at no cost to the Fridley taxpayer. This is an absolute center of activity in the summertime for families and for many of the festivities of the 49ers days. Just a wonderful facility. The corner here of Osborne and University is another area that's had a real diverse history as far as Fridley is concerned. Behind us we'll look at Bob's Produce, one of the real landmarks within Fridley. What many people don't understand perhaps is that Bob Shore, who is the owner now, he and his dad started a vegetable and fruit stand over on East River Road and Mississippi Street, and actually farmed the land behind that and produced some of their produce themselves. This has gone through a lot of changes. There was Bob's has been here, but it's been renovated. There was a garden center. There's been 3 or 4 different garden centers here. On the southeast corner of Osborne and University, the building that we're looking at was the original Cub store. It started here in Fridley. They had a big sign up there called Consumers United for Buying. That's where the name Cub came from. You went in there, it was strictly a warehouse grocer, much sooner than the other warehouse grocers began. You got a big cart. You were given a black crayon that you marked your prices on the cans. You had to bring your own boxes or bags, whatever you used. And from that small development, the Cub food store chain, now owned by Super Value, but they'll always have their beginnings here in Fridley. Down the street from the Cub food stores is now the Fridley Dairy Queen, and some of you will remember the Dairy Queen was originally located on University in Mississippi, where the Christensen Crossing homes are. And because they were displaced and they wanted to remain into Fridley, they relocated up here just off the corner of Osborne and Mississippi. Another good industry and has a long history here in Fridley. The Freedom Station on the corner was a long-time Conoco station, and as many of the stations have done, they had undergone major renovations and upgrading, and has become a very attractive business here in Fridley. On the northwest corner behind us is one of the original restaurants in Fridley, University Station. It's gone under a number of different proprietorships. Originally started by Bob Shore, and many of you will remember that. You walked in and weighed your sandwiches, there was soups. The interior of University Station contains some real antique materials. The stairways and some of the railings are from some of the old churches in the state of Minnesota, and some of the other decor is also very, very old and probably worth a great deal to some antique dealers. As Fridley has grown, more and more new development has moved into Fridley, which has done nothing but enhance our image. One of the very, very wonderful additions to Fridley in the recent year has been Bachman's Floral, Sam's Club, which is a subsidiary of Walmart, which is also located nearby here in Fridley, which are all good industries, a good tax base for our city. Significant to this area where I'm standing, or near where I'm standing right now, was back in the early 1960s, there was a very infamous event occurred right here. There was the body of a young girl named Barbara Broyles from Columbia Heights was found very near to where I'm standing. Unfortunately, it was one of those crimes that has never been solved. As we hear all about the good things about Fridley's history, there are some infamous things as well. This entire area in which we're standing, north of Bob's Produce Ranch, was from the aerials that we can all see back in the 1940s and 1950s while Fridley was becoming a city. This area was all wetlands. There was ponding in here. I think many of the pioneers in Fridley thought that this land probably could never be built on. I think a good example of what this area looked like is by walking through the Springbrook Nature Center. That is pretty much a good example of what this whole area was at one time. And through modern techniques of building, of dewatering and so on, these whole areas have been built. There's a lot of factories, trucking companies. Park Construction is located here, one of our early businesses, and also one of the big developers of the Fridley Community Park that we talked about. As we go up University Avenue to the city limits, again, another unique aspect is where University Avenue hits Northtown Shopping Center. It's a very significant thing at that corner. 4 of Anoka County cities come together at that corner. On the southeast corner is Spring Lake Park. On the northeast corner is Blaine. On the northwest corner is Coon Rapids, where the Red Lobster is. And on the southeast corner, where Slumberland is Fridley. Kind of a unique geographical occurrence. Over the years, certain aspects of Fridley have had some controversies. In 1965, a group of Fridley residents had intentions to build a municipal, or at that time, a private golf course in Fridley. And they went up into the very northern boundaries off of University Avenue and County Road 132 and designated a 130-acre site for a possible municipal golf course, or private golf course, excuse me. In 1965, we also had a series of devastating tornadoes which sort of threw that idea out the window, at least temporarily. In the early 1970s, again, people began to look at some use of the land in that area, and it became a major controversy over whether that area should be a golf course or a nature center. The city became very polarized. There was a tremendous split in how people felt. Ultimately, it went to a city referendum, and it was determined that the 127-acre plat should become a nature center. And with the help of land and water conservation funds, the state of Minnesota, Anoka County, and some other legislation, Springbrook Nature Center was built. And this is an example of the land and the people who use it. It is a very, very well-used facility. I think gives you an idea of what Fridley certainly looked like. This whole area and the area south of here looked very much like this for a long time. I think people would probably be very remiss if they didn't understand that there certainly was another use for this land, and you'll see possibly what it could have been. The city of Fridley has seen its share of tragedies, probably major of which were the devastating floods of 1965, and in the same year a series of 7 tornadoes came through Fridley and devastated the city terribly. Probably one of the most famous or infamous tornadoes is the tornado that hit the Nature Center in 1986. It was probably one of the most photographed tornadoes ever. A team from Carry 11 photographed the tornado almost in the eye of it. They hovered over the Nature Center and watched the tornado for who knows how many minutes as it devastated the Savannah Oaks and the major trees in the Springbrook Nature Center. But because they were able to photograph this, it has been used by tornado experts and everything to try and understand more and more about it. And if you go to the Springbrook Nature Center, they have a major display of the tornado and the devastation and the activity caused by that tornado. If the other tornadoes and the floods, if you want further information from those, there's displays at the Fridley Historical Society in the old Hayes Annex building, which is now the Fridley Historical Center on Mississippi Street. Much of Fridley is divided up into neighborhoods, and one of the prime neighborhoods in Fridley is the Riverview Heights area, which sits on the river just west of East River Road, and a scene of some extremely devastating floods, the most recent being in 1996. And probably one of the most devastating was in 1965, just before the major tornadoes, when the river got up above the banks and devastated some homes, which forced the city and the state to do some rebuilding of the area. And if you travel on Riverview Terrace in the Riverview Heights area, what you probably don't realize is you're actually traveling on the top of a dike or a levee that was built by the Army Corps of Engineers to prevent any flooding. This year in 1999, we're doing a major road renovation in this area, and we'll also be doing some ponding, some sewer problems, and correcting some sewer problems, and recreating the area into a much safer and nicer neighborhood for all of the people to live. I think the residents here in the Riverview Heights area are probably as zealous of their neighborhoods of any neighborhoods in Fridley. It's got the natural beauty of the river, which they want to sustain. It's got the closeness of the neighbors themselves. It has a beautiful park down here, which is dry most of the time. The river is actually down this year, and it will not cause any major flooding this year, but the river is what it is, and we have to learn to live with it, with its ups and downs, and we have to do the prevention that's necessary to protect the residents down here in this area. But if you get a chance to come down to this area, it's a wonderful, beautiful area to visit, a beautiful area in which to live. We've talked about the major thoroughfares that run through Fridley. We've talked about Highway 694 and East River Road and University. The fourth major thoroughfare is, in fact, Highway 65. The renovations are taking place here are major. They are being done for numbers of reasons. One is to accommodate the new international headquarters of Medtronic. Moore Lake is a feature of Fridley. Highway 65 runs directly through the lake and separates it into Westmore Lake and Eastmore Lake. Central Avenue was put through Moore Lake in 1956. It's the major artery that runs north to Cambridge and to many of the, what we call, going up north for the weekend to your cabins and so on. But it's a major thoroughfare through Fridley, and as Medtronic builds their new facilities, it will become a gateway to Anoka County. There's going to be some widening of Highway 65 through the lake in the near future. Hopefully some lighting on the lake to enhance the view as you come through Fridley. It's very important, as I think, as we look at Fridley and our community, that image becomes a very, very important part of it. Fridley is home to a lot of major industries. One of these is the former Onan Corporation, now part of Cummins. It's been a major player in the industrial growth of Fridley. It's been here since the mid-1960s. And as we look here in 1999, a further expansion, some major trucking warehousing going on to their site. This was also the location of the sort of infamous Minnesota-Ontario Paper Company on this site that did creosoting of railroad ties as an industry, and unfortunately, when they left, also left some of their tanks and created a major hazardous waste site which had to be cleaned up because there was some concerns of it affecting the Fridley and New Brighton water. That problem has been resolved and part of the technology of the present. Another one of our corporate giants, and one that has been extremely friendly to Fridley, is the Medtronic Corporation. Their Rice Creek site has been here since the 1960s. It was a company that was begun in St. Anthony, Minnesota, actually in a garage. It's the world's leader in heart pumps, pacemakers. It's acquiring all sorts of other businesses in the neurological areas. And the biggest news of all, however, is that the Medtronic Corporation has agreed to make Fridley its international headquarters. They'll be building on the old 100 Twin Drive-In site starting this spring. Completion probably not for about 4 or 5 years, the total completion, but it will be a landmark area of Fridley. It will put Fridley on the map, not just from a statewide perspective, but from a worldwide perspective. It'll create close to 4,000 new jobs, highly technical jobs. It'll enhance our image, it will enhance our value of our homes, our tax base. Medtronic has been a wonderful neighbor, and we love to have them in Fridley. A wonderful feature of the city of Fridley has been the development of its park and recreational facilities throughout the city. Standing here at Cummins Park, probably the largest of the neighborhood parks, and some of the wonderful playground equipment that's been purchased over the years for all of the young people. The whole process of the park system in Fridley was developed early on by some of the founders who had some insight and some look to the future of how Fridley should look. It was determined as Fridley began to grow in the 1950s that as builders built in certain areas, they had to contribute something back to the city. And that was established that they would give 10% of their developed areas back to the parks, either in the area, in the manner of land or in money for the value of that land, for development of the parks. And as you go around Fridley and you see a facility like Cummins Park, some of the neighborhood parks that go from this size of Cummins to the very, very small corner lots like Ed Wilma's Park with just a tot lot, Most of them have been built with ball fields, skating rinks, shelters, tennis courts, and the intent was that anybody who lived in the city of Fridley would be within walking distance of a park. And in almost all cases of every neighborhood in the city, that's a true statement. There are a few areas that just didn't have the space available, but certainly there's a park nearby. The Parks and Rec system also includes the Moore Lake Beach, and that had a long history. Moore Lake is a natural drainage area. Back in the late 1950s and 1960, the Moore Lake Beach was developed by bringing in truckloads of sand, putting them out on the ice in the wintertime and letting them sink down and develop the beach. Other areas, we have our biggest park, which is the Springbrook Nature Center, a 127-acre park that's set aside for nature walks, observation of animals, vegetation, and so on. We have Loch Park and the Mississippi Riverfront Park, which are actually owned by the city of Fridley and through a joint powers agreement are operated by the Anoka County. And if you go down the Riverfront Park, which stretches from Highway 694 all the way down to the city limits on 37th Avenue Northeast to the Minneapolis Waterworks, it's a vast area of bikeways, walkways, overlooks for the river. I think all of us in Fridley are very, very proud of the entire system that's been built within the city of Fridley. Another part of that has been the building of the bikeway walkway system. We always maintained that a person who really was interested in biking or hiking could go all the way from the Lino Lakes area of Anoka County all the way down through the city of Minneapolis on some bikeway walkway that is a connect. So some of those things which didn't exist 50 years ago or 40 years ago are things that all of us in the year 1999 can appreciate and enjoy and hopefully will expand upon in the future. A city is a lot more than just businesses and streets and rivers and parks. The biggest thing about any city is its people and its housing. The population of Fridley in the 1950 census showed in the maps to be around 3,500 people. Fridley had its major growth both in housing and in population in the late 1950s and definitely through the 1960s. The typical home that was being built in the 1950s and 60s was the one that's from behind me. A typical is a 3-bedroom rambler, generally an unattached garage, sometimes attached, very often just single-car garage. Most of these homes that were built behind Hayes School towards Hayes and the river were built somewhere in the neighborhood of $13,000 or $14,000. Just recently, and this is 1999, in our assessment of the average home value of Fridley of an average home, which would be typical of what we're seeing, would be somewhere around $119,000. And again, you have to be reminded that these homes were built for around $13,000 or $14,000. It's a pretty good appreciation on their money. To show you a little bit of the rapid growth of housing, where we're standing here on Monroe Street in 67th, my wife was a teacher at the original Hayes School in 1956 and was very typical for her first grade students on recess for exercise is to take a nature hike from the Hayes School down to Rice Creek, which was a pretty good walk through the then sand dunes and trails that led down to Rice Creek. There were no homes north of 66th behind Hayes School until about 1958 or 59. It's so important as we move ahead in Fridley that we continue to improve and continue to develop our homes and our population. Schools are always a part of any city. Fridley has a very unique situation of that within the city of Fridley, There are 4 school districts that come into the city. The center of the city is the Fridley School District, Independent District number 14. To the south of 53rd, generally in that area, students go to the Columbia Heights School, District 13. People that live north of 73rd in what is called the the Melody Manor area go to the Spring Lake Park schools, and a small segment up on East River Road and both sides east and west of East River Road north of 79th are actually in the Anoka-Hennepin School District. So it's very unique in Fridley. We're sitting here on the steps of one of the original schools in Fridley, the old Hayes Annex. This was not the original school. The original Fridley Public School was over on 5th Street in Mississippi at the site of where the old Brunkow Music used to be. This school, which is at one time called the Hayes Annex, was an elementary school for then Anoka County District 23. It's got quite a storied history. This did at one time house some of the special services of the Fridley Public Schools. And as the school district began to decline in enrollment, this building was taken over, rather than having it raised, which we didn't want to do, was taken over and is now the home of the Fridley Historical Society. It contains 2 floors. It was also the first school in which the Fridley wrestling program began. We had some old mats that we put down in the basement here, and some of the early wrestlers probably remember that, of wrestling down here in the basement of the Hayes Annex. Just to the east of Hayes Annex was the original elementary school of the Fridley district of more modern times, which is now called Hayes School in commemoration of the first superintendent of the Fridley schools, Harold Hayes. It certainly doesn't look like it did back in 1964. Up till 1964, Hayes School was a green cinder block building. In 1965, May 6, 1965, Fridley was hit by some devastating tornadoes, and the Hayes School was obliterated. And like Phoenix, it rose from the ashes and now is a beautiful modern elementary school. Unfortunately, only one of 2 of the elementary schools left remaining in the Fridley School District. At one time, at the height of its growth, the Fridley School District contained a high school, a junior high school, and 6 elementary schools. Today, only Hayes School and Stevenson School, its prototype over on East River Road, remain. Of the other elementary schools, the Rice Creek Elementary School over on 66th and Fridley Street now contains the beautiful homes of the Creek Park edition. Riverwood School up on 73rd and East River Road, that also was raised in the 1980s, and more homes built on that site. Parkview Elementary School, which was the second of the modern elementary schools, still remains in some form on 61st and 7th Street. It still serves some of the home education, some of the child care centers, and as a part of the old Parkview Elementary School, the city and the school district combined to build, just in the last year, the Fridley Community Center, one of the wonderful additions to the whole community of Fridley. It had its grand opening just a few months ago, and it's built to serve the needs of all of us. The last elementary school that was built was Gardena Elementary School up on Gardena Avenue. It it had the shortest life of all of the elementary schools, operated for only about 12 or 14 years. And then as the enrollment declined, the Gardena Elementary School was sold and now houses one of the largest Islamic centers in the Twin Cities. And to show the diversity, I suppose, of the Fridley community, the large Islamic center housed at Gardena is directly across the street from one of the large Catholic parochial high schools, Totino Grace High School, originally called Fridley Grace, but then with the endowment of $1 million or more by the Jim Totino family, it changed its name about 15 years ago to Totino Grace. Just an example of the diversity of all of us. The other high schools that are served by Fridley are Columbia Heights, Spring Lake Park, and Coon Rapids High School, which is part of Anoka Hennepin. There's a lot of people that feel that perhaps the school districts and the city boundaries would be a lot simpler if they were all the same, but they are actually two separate entities. School districts and cities are two separate governing bodies, two separate taxing bodies, and lots of complicating reasons why they can't all be a part of the same unit. The fact that Fridley has 4 school districts within its city is somewhat unique, but it is not unusual for communities to have several school districts in a consolidated situation. So Fridley is not so unique in that example. The Fridley schools have gone from an original graduating class of 1959 of 47 students, reached its peak in 1978, graduating 460 students, and now graduates about 200 students a year, and that is a pretty steady number as you look down into the grades. We'll maintain our enrollment of about 200 students that will graduate each year. Churches are another feature of Fridley that is so important to all of us. Within the city limits, there are 11 different churches, different faiths, different segments of the same faith, and so on. One of the original churches in Fridley was the Michael Severtus Unitarian Church, now located just off of Brookview Drive. The original location, Fridley, the original location of the Michael Severtus Church, as some of the old-timers might remember, was over on the corner of Mississippi Street and East River Road. As you traveled north to Anoka on Old East River Road, you came to Mississippi Street, which was then the county road that went across to Central Avenue. On that corner there was Steiger Grietzine car dealership. On the corner where the Cara Collision Center, long called the Christensen Auto Body, is located, was the site of the original Fridley Hotel. 2-story structure, wooden, with wooden stairs leading to the upstairs. And then just to the north of the Fridley Hotel was the Michael Severtus Church, which is located directly behind me, of course, been renovated a great deal. Then along next to the Michael Severtus Church was a small cemetery, which is also still in that area. Other major churches in Fridley are the Redeemer Lutheran Church and St. Philip's Lutheran Church, large denominations. There's the Roslyn Park Church, the Fridley United Methodist Church, Fridley Covenant Church, Grace Evangelical Church, the Islamic Center, the Russian Orthodox Church, some other smaller churches, Woodcrest Baptist Church is another church, and some other smaller churches that show the diversity which is Fridley. And I think it's something that Fridley is proud of, the fact that people of different races and religions can all get along and be proud of the heritage which is Fridley. As the city of Fridley looks to its future, one of the innovations that we've begun here is to have a visioning process take place. Several meetings have been held by citizens in Fridley with their sole aim is to say, what would you like Fridley to be like in the next 15 years? Assuming that money is not an object, What are some of the things you want to see? People have talked about home values, they've talked about building in Fridley, they've talked about the use of the river as a possible asset to Fridley. Because we are on the river, we don't really think of Fridley as being a river town. Maybe that would be an idea. Basically, I think people like to live in Fridley. From all the surveys we hear, people are very happy here. The North Star Corridor, which is a heavy rail system, we need to look at the future in transportation. We cannot continually build highways to provide for all of the growth in the 7-county metropolitan area. One of the big features is the Northtown Corridor, coming down from St. Cloud to downtown Minneapolis via the heavy rail. The rail already exists. The possibility of a station here in Fridley, possibly on 61st and East River Road, where you could drive, park your car, get on the train, get into Minneapolis, go up to St. Cloud, transfer to other areas of the city through light rail, buses, whatever. We have to get off the highways with our automobiles. Every city has its problems, there's no question about that. If you look at any survey, one of the top things that people are concerned with is crime within their cities. A major feature within the city of Fridley to help reduce the matter of crime has been the Neighborhood Watch program. Each of the neighborhoods in Fridley have been designated with a name, developed into neighborhood block captains who organize the neighborhoods to watch out for one another, watch their homes, report suspicious activities, all in an effort to make Fridley a safer and a better place to live. Another aspect of Fridley that is brought up just recently is the Values First program. As shown on this sign, it represents the values of honesty, sincerity, and so on. There's 7 different features represented by the rainbow of Values First. It was an organization started by the Fridley churches and it was developed through the city government programs and through the schools to make Fridley a safer and a better place to live. Fridley became a city in 1949. To a lot of people, it was nothing more than the Minneapolis Waterworks. Fridley has developed into a viable major city in the state of Minnesota. Its growth has been steady and its political vision has been good. Hopefully the next 50 years will be as optimistic as the past. Although our growth has been sporadic at times and there have been some disappointments, Fridley is a bright, shining example of what good people, good planning, good industry, and good government can do for a city.